Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to do a full strip down of my cart. So here's what we're going to cover in this video. First up, we'll be stripping off all these lovely stickers that looked beautiful at the beginning of the season, but now look a little bit battle worn and need to all come off. After that, we will remove all the bodywork and give it all a clean. After that, what we're going to do is we're going to remove all the front end bits of metal work from the cart, get all that off. After we've done the front end, we're going to do the middle of the cart, so it'll be the steering column, the steering wheel, and the seat and the floor tray. After that, we will move to the back end of the cart and remove the axle and everything that is attached to it. So the sprocket, the brake disc, and we're going to get all the bearings off and get them all clean. Once that is all done, we will then have a completely bare chassis, which will take all these bits of tape off and all these bits that hold bits of pipe on, and we're going to wash the whole chassis down and get the whole chassis clean. So let's get going. For taking off the stickers, we need a couple of tools. Your fingers, because you've got to reach in and really sort of pull off these things. If you've got short nails like me, you might need a Stanley knife. So kids, get your parents' help. And if you really have got a struggle pulling off, you might have to use some pliers just to really pull the stickers off. However, if you really struggle, there'll be a tool that we'll bring out a little bit later if I need it. So I've already come across the issue that I thought I might come across when I first started doing this, where the stickers are a little bit difficult to come off. They've come off a little bit tacky. It's because it's 10 degrees outside, so it's very, very cold and the stickers need to be warmed up a little bit. Now, the ideal tool for warming up these stickers is a heat gun, which you can buy from a DIY shop for 30, 40 quid. However, I don't have a heat gun, so I'm using my wife's hairdryer. As you can see, I'm using the hairdryer to warm up these very thick stickers so that they lift off a little bit easier. It also loosens up some of the adhesive on the sticker itself to make it just come off a little bit easier. So I got the job done nice and quickly. So now that we've got all of the stickers off of the cart and some kept as trophies, we can now get to the business of taking everything off the cart bodywork wise and get everything back to just bare metal bits on the chassis. So let's get going. So one bit of advice I do have is when you're taking nuts and bolts off of different parts of the cart, because obviously there are thousands of nuts and bolts on this cart, what you want to do is you want to make sure when you put things away, you keep the nuts and bolts that were supposed to be on it. So at least you know when you come back to it, it's like, oh, okay, this one is supposed to have a washer. So this one actually doesn't have a washer, but they're supposed to have a washer. So it just gives you an idea of where things go and what things go where. So getting the bodywork off is the easy part. It's just undoing bolts. The hard bits are yet to come. So that is all the bodywork, all the stickers, all off the cart now. So we are now down to just all the bare metal work. So what we will start on next is the front section of the cart. All this metal work here, the pedals and all that kind of stuff, we're going to get all that off. However, I'm running out of light, so I'm going to do that tomorrow. So, on to the next stage of the rebuild of the cart. We are going to take off the front end, which is the accelerator pedal, the brake pedals and all the metal work at the front. But what we need to do is go through a couple of the tools that we need. We're going to need some cable ties. I'll show you what they're for in a minute. We're going to need 13mm spanner, 10mm spanner, a 4 and a 5mm hex key. So, first thing we actually need to do before we get to actually taking the brake off is, well, first of all we need to take this off. Now, the reason we need to do this and the reason we need the cable ties is because this piston that is connected to the brake lever, if I just undo that, that will shoot out the back and all the fluid will come out and the brake system will be basically ruined. So, before you start taking the brake system off, you need to wrap the pistons around this body of the brake cylinder. Put two brake cable ties together, wrap them around the end, into there. The second one, just to be safe. And then we are all nicely attached and our brake system isn't going to go flying. And if you like to tidy things up like I do, snip, snip. Now that, when I take that off, isn't going to go anywhere. So what we're doing now is trying to take off all the pedals, but the pedals first, I've got to take the throttle cable off, but I've already come to an issue.
So I've stopped the procedures at the moment because, as you can see here, I'm trying to take out the throttle cable, but as you can see it's all frayed, so what I'm going to have to do is cut off the cable, cut off all these bits, or just cut the cable, or just cut the throttle cable in half to get that out, because that is broken.
So now that the throttle cable's out, I'm just getting everything off, taking the pedals off, then going over to the front metalwork. So I had a issue with the front metalwork, as you'll see in a minute. On the left hand side of your screen, I was really struggling to get that nut off, because actually the nut had rounded and the hex key had rounded itself. So I had to work very, very hard and very, very carefully not to round them more. I eventually got there, and it did eventually come off, but you just got to be really careful if you've got any rounded hex keys or rounded nuts. You just got to be really, really gentle with them and not try and overdo it, because then you'll never get them off. That is the front all de-rigged from the cart. We took off the pedals and all the metal work and everything that goes with it. Things I noticed that I did when I put this cart together almost a year ago was I didn't put enough washers in places, and I over tightened a lot of things. So when you saw me struggling on this side of the cart, it was because I'd done this up too tight, and I've now stripped the bolt and the Allen key. So I'm going to have to change a lot of my nuts and bolts just to make sure they're not rounded. So a few of these ones here, so I've left these in here, they're round, they're a little bit rounded, so I just want to make sure they're not rounded. So if I have to change anything during the season next year, it's not going to cost me any time at the track. So this is the perfect time to change all those bits and pieces. I haven't taken the footrest off. The reason I haven't is because you kind of got to get underneath. You can, if you're desperate to, get a spanner and hold it up underneath and get it out, but it's a bit of a faff. So that I will save for when I take the floor tray off, which is the thing that we're going to do next. So here we are for the next part, which is to take apart the middle part of the cart, which is a bigger job because you've got all these complex bits to take apart. So you're going to need a lot of tools for this one. So you're going to need a set of snips to cut all these cable ties off, a whole range of spanners, so a 5, a 6, a 5, a 4, a 5 and a 6. But you also need a 7. Now what you'll find with a 7 is a 7 doesn't come in normal hex key sets, so you have to go to someone like Halfords and buy what is a brake hex set, right? And it comes as one of these. I got mine from Halfords if you're in the UK, and what that is for taking off the kingpin. Okay, so we'll get round to that. Some 10 and 13mm spanners, but you also need a 23mm for taking off the stub axles. All right, and something you will always need is a big rubber hammer to bash stuff off. So let's get going. So in this little bit, what we're doing is taking off the front wheel hubs, we're undoing the floor tray, and we are taking off the steering column. But what we're doing before we take the steering column off is we are marking where the steering column is actually bolted into, so we get it in the right ride height for when I put it back, when I start to put the cart back together. So something I think that you should see a bit more close up because of how it comes apart is the connection to the stub axle. So you need 5mm hex and a 13mm spanner. You break it off, and you've got to be careful here because in here you have a washer here and a washer there, so you just need to be careful when it comes off, especially because they're special type of washers. I don't have all of my special type of washers. That's something I need to go and buy. But yeah, as you can see, there's this washer on the top, and as that comes off, you see there's a washer underneath. That's only a small washer. It's actually not the correct washer. This one here with this little lip on it, that is the correct washer. So you want to make sure you put this all back together. I'm going to replace these nuts and bolts and washers just because they're a bit manky and I want some fresh ones. But yeah, just put them on there like we said with everything else, and then that is your steering column off, apart from that, which I have to go and disconnect. Back to the time lapse. So at the moment I'm just disconnecting the Alfano and putting all the steering wheel away. Now I'm just trying to get all the metal work off the rest of the car. However, what is happening here is I'm struggling to get off the floor tray, so I'm struggling to release one of the chassis protectors. So let's check back in with the head cam and find out what was wrong. So, a very awkward thing happened, which was this is the little clip that keeps the centre of the front chassis protector on. Now that is supposed to be fully housed in there, so that this nut can just screw on. But what the difficulty I was having was that was just spinning. So what I did was I shoved the flathead screwdriver up underneath, wedged it against, and held it in place. So what I'm doing in this part of the breakdown is marking out the holes where the seat goes in, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to restore this whole seat, I'm going to re-fiberglass it all, but I want to reuse the same holes. So I've circled them all so that when I do put the seat back together, it goes back in the same place. Right, we are back to the head cam again, because again, it's another one of these things that's difficult to take apart. So what you've got here is you've got the kingpin bolt, which holds on your stub axle. Okay, inside the stub axle you have two washers. These help with your ride height, so having both here means I was running maximum ride height. If you remember in the last video, I was scraping the floor. Front is still dragging on the floor. So that's to help keep my bumper off the floor in that last race. So when you undo this, as I said, you use your 7mm and a 17mm down here. This will be finger tight now. So on here you have a big fat washer. Do not lose those washers, you need those. And then the kingpin comes out. Now this is obviously under weight and under load, and when you're doing this with everything attached to it, it's under a lot of weight, so push it up so you don't lose the washer that's in the top. Obviously if you've got them either side when you've got a neutral ride height, you just have to be careful not to lose them. And then, as with everything else, we put it back in. And also remember that in here, knowingly it's not moving for this one, but in here there is a washer that's loose, and sometimes if you can't get the kingpin in, it's because that washer has pushed out to the side. So just remember that. So for this final bit, I'm just taking off the rest of the metal work, including the camber and caster pills. You need to be really careful when you take out the camber and caster pills. They have a very small hex key and it's really, really easy around, so just be very careful and take it very easy.
So that's it now. Whole middle part of the cart is all stripped down. All we have left now to deal with is the rear of the cart, so we'll be dealing with that next.
So we're now on to the last part of the strip down of the cart, which is the rear end. So the rear end is probably the most complicated part. You've got the bits that make the cart go and make the cart stop attached to it. So first thing I recommend for anyone who's taking the rear apart for the first time is take lots of photos from different angles, how things look, where the bearing carrier sits, because the bearing carrier sits in two different ways. I'll show you that in more detail, and how the brake goes together, being super duper important, and obviously with the sprocket carrier as well. So just make sure you take photos. Especially thing to take photos of is where the bolts go on the side of the bearing carriers as well. So be aware of everything that goes on. Take lots of photos so it can go back in the right order. With all that said, tools you're going to need for the job: obviously your Allen keys, also going to need a hammer, a big rubber hammer, and that, which is an axle basher. You can probably get away without it if you've got an axle that slides in nice and easily. If you don't, this is the best thing. I'll show you in more detail when we get to it, but pop it into the axle and you hammer it through. What you would also ideally need is a nugga-dugga. A nugga-dugga is an impact driver for getting out these bolts here. I don't have a nugga-dugga. I just have a normal Makita low-powered drill. So these are going to be difficult for me to get out, and I might have to use a 13mm spanner to get those out, and then use that to get the rest of the way out. That's about it. So let's get going. So something to notice: I cover my bearing grub screws with tape. So when you take them off, obviously there's a bit of tape in one of those grub screws, but to be fair, if you ever take the grub screws out, just replace the grub screws. You've got to be really careful with these because they're quite soft, so when you try and untighten them to get them out, they can round. So just be really, really careful, because if you round one of those off, this whole process becomes an absolute disaster. So yeah, just be really, really careful when taking these out. So here's a quick video. So with GXUK karts, because obviously the sprocket is inboarded, it is very difficult to get the sprocket off if they aren't cut. So we cut all our sprockets with a very thin saw, and what we have to do, and it looks quite brutal to get them off the axle, is to bend them on and off. Otherwise, if you don't want to cut your sprockets, you have to take your whole axle off to get a sprocket on. So what you do is you hold it like this. Now I know this feels weird. I remember doing this for the first time thinking it's not entirely possible, but you hold it like that with your hand pushing on the axle, then you push that open, and then you just slide it off. And that is how you change a sprocket. So another quick note on your rear axle, if you haven't done a rear axle before, you have these things which are called keyways. And what they do is they stop crucial components like the bearing carrier and the brake disc from falling off, and obviously the hubs for the wheels, stops them falling off. They can be a pain in the bum to get out, like this one is really stuck, so I'm going to have to take a screwdriver and probably a pair of pliers and maybe even a hammer to get that out. But the other ones, they pulled out quite easily, just a pair of pliers. This one's going to be a little bit more difficult. But you also have to make sure you're taking all these out, because you will not be able to get the axle out without taking these out. Got it? Good. So there's lots of stopping in this one, because this one's all slightly a little bit more complicated because the axle's got to come out. And as you can see, my axle's a bit grimy and a bit dirty. Okay, so I'm going to give this axle a full clean using a form of degreaser. I've got elbow grease, I've also got brake cleaner. Yeah, any form of degreaser will do. And you want to just clean it all down and get it all nice and clean. You can then use a little bit of wet and dry sandpaper to sand some of these rougher bits down so it slides out a little bit easier. Or you can use some foil to just scratch it down and give it a good clean. Make sure you then rinse it with WD-40. I don't have any WD-40. I need to buy some WD-40 and rinse that all down. And then what you want to do, once all that is all clean, is you take your newly bought axle basher and your rubber mallet. You stick it in the end of the axle and then hammer the axle through. Okay, depending on the condition of your axle will depend how long this will take, and then as you get to the carriers you pull them off and that'll all come off. So let's go back to time lapsing, because you don't want to hear me banging or banging on. Ha. So what you see now is me taking out the rest of the axle, giving it a nice bang through. Luckily it came off nice and easily. That's because I keep it in good condition. Now the axle bearings are coming off and I'm giving them a clean. And once they're clean, I move over to the hardest part of taking the whole car apart, which is getting off the rear bumper bolts. Now because this is a rubber bolt that goes into the chassis, it flays out when you screw it in. And I had a real trouble getting these off. And actually the video that helped me get it off was by Power Republic, and I will link that in the video and in the description, because it'll be much easier. His video is nice and short and sweet. It tells you exactly how to do it. Now I'm moving over to getting off all the stickers. I struggled to get a couple of them off. Whoever knew electrical tape would be difficult to get off a go-kart, but I can get that off with a heat gun or a hairdryer later. So while I'm trying and failing to get the final bits of stickers off my chassis, I want to show you this little thing. That is the bearing that holds in the steering column. So to get that out, you get a pair of pliers, and you've got to get out this little retaining washer. Just pop out. Grimy as hell. That way, there we go. And that comes out. Now that should clean up nicely. These don't tend to get too much wear, but it's good to give it a little clean up. And now that is the cart fully stripped down. Right, now that the chassis is completely bare, we've stripped absolutely everything else off the chassis, it is time to get the chassis cleaned. Because I am not getting it acid dipped and resprayed like I did last season, it needs a proper scrub down before I start putting it back together. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat it like a car. I have a big bucket of hot soapy water, and I'm going with some car cleaner in it, and I'm going to scrub the whole chassis down. I've got some stiff brushes to get into some of the harder to reach places, and we're going to get this chassis nice and shiny and clean, and even give it a polish. So you can see me degreasing the chassis, then giving it a spray, then giving it a rub down, getting all this dirt and grime off, then giving it a spray off, and then another wash. And then once we've got all that, we've got as much dirt off as we possibly can. We flip it around and give it another wash, getting all the little crevices that build up a lot of dirt. Then we dry it off with a chamois, getting all the nooks and crannies again, getting a lot of the dirt out, a lot of the grime out. And then I whipped out some of the Auto Glim Super Resin Polish just to polish up the chassis and make it look nice and shiny. So that concludes the full strip down of my GX kart. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've taken away a lot of information from what I've given you. If there's anything I've missed, please go to the comments and ask me, and I will come back and I will answer every single question that is asked of me. While you're in the comments, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, because obviously the next video, now that I've stripped it down, will be to rebuild it. So catch me for that one, and hope to see you soon. Thank you, goodbye.